Greetings. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor Masterclass. This is a platform where we learn from the best. These individuals are pioneers and change makers whose vision and entrepreneurship provides teaching moments and inspiration. Joining us today is Debbie Lindsay, a registered dietitian. Enjoy this masterclass.
Hi, I'm Debbie Lindsay. I'm a registered dietitian, and this is my masterclass. So dietetics is the study of human nutrition and how it relates to health and disease. And it's very much a medically based degree. So there's a lot of learning about medical nutrition therapy, which is the basis of what dietitians do. I decided to do it because I was really interested in the sciences. I loved biology at school, and I actually thought I might want to be a doctor, and also wanted to maybe be a physiotherapist. That was kind of where I was heading towards. But I did a little bit of a practical session in a physiotherapy ward in a town close by to where we lived as a school leaver, and realized that maybe the hands-on thing for me might not quite be what I was after. And actually, funny enough, when I worked in the hospital, I often found myself lying on the floor with my legs in the air because I'd passed out when attending ward rounds. So I think it was probably the best choice for me, because dietetics is still medically based, so there's a lot of medicine involved, but you're not actually having to poke and prod the patient and deal with them physically so much. So dietetics is a BSc degree. It's a Bachelor of Science degree. So your first year, depending on which universities you go to, obviously there's universities in the UK, there's universities in Australia, in America, and South Africa. I studied in South Africa, so the first year was a basic BSc, so you do all your usual subjects, which are chemistry, physics, biology, maths and statistics and all of those kinds of things. And then in the second year you start to go more in towards the dietetics kind of subjects. So we did things like food science, we did physiology, we did biochemistry, we did health psychology, and then we also went into the dietetic side, or the nutrition therapy modules as well, which is then where you focus on how do you adjust the diet to help people with specific medical conditions. So if the person has diabetes, if they have liver problems, if they need to be fed by a tube, for example, you go into all of that as well. So it's very much a science degree. You need to have done science subjects at school and maths if you want to be accepted into a dietetics course. So once you've finished your dietetics degree, you have to do a postgraduate course or a postgraduate year or qualification in order to register as a dietitian. So just doing the degree itself isn't enough to get you registered as a dietitian and to be able to practice as a dietitian. You must do the final year, which is an internship. So you work in hospitals and you will work in the various wards and the various departments, outpatients, clinics and so on, dealing with patients. So you learn the ropes. You've got to do those hours in order to qualify as a dietitian. So obviously I qualified quite a long time ago, and in those days we did 3 different modules. Our first module was therapeutic nutrition, so we worked in the clinical wards. Second was community nutrition, so we worked in clinics, which is more on a community level, and we also had to do food service management, which was basically working in a hospital setting, in the hospital kitchen, and working on how to formulate the special diets that actually go up to the wards for the patients that have been prescribed. So if you don't do that, you can't qualify or register as a proper dietitian. So I went to school in South Africa. I grew up in South Africa, and I went to St. Dominic's Convent School in Boksburg, can you believe? And so I did my matric there, and I studied the science subjects, so I did maths, biology, chemistry, or physical science as it was called in those days. And yeah, I think I was fairly driven. I did very well at school. I got all A's for my matric, so that was helpful in getting me into my university degree. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I found it very interesting. As I said, I love the sciences, so for me it was something that I really wanted to look at and enjoyed learning about. And then when I qualified as a dietitian, or I finished my course, I actually had to work in a government hospital for a year afterwards because I got a bursary for my studies. So I did my year at Johannesburg General Hospital, and I worked in the pediatric ward there in the internal medicine department. I really enjoyed that working in a teaching hospital really gives you such a lot of experience, and you work with many very clever, very well qualified people. I had the opportunity there actually to present a paper. I worked in a cystic fibrosis clinic, and I presented a paper at a conference, and I ended up actually on TV in South Africa for about 10 minutes talking about cystic fibrosis and how nutrition benefits children with cystic fibrosis. And then after that, I thought I'd explore the private sector, so I went and applied for a job as a pharmaceutical rep, which I did for a year, and then I moved to Zimbabwe. So I had met my now husband, but then boyfriend at university. He was a farmer in Zimbabwe. He's a Zimbabwean, and he was farming in Nyanga. So I came up to Zimbabwe and found myself a job in Harare, working with another dietitian called Liz Small, and she very kindly gave me a job, and I worked in town. So I used to work Monday to Friday, and then I drove up from Harare to Nyanga every weekend and back on a Monday for pretty much about 8 or 9 months until we got engaged, and then I moved up to Nyanga. Then I went and set up my own practice in Mutare, and I was working there for 3 years. So I used to travel from Nyanga to Mutare on a Monday and a Friday and see patients there. Then I had a bit of a break because Zimbabwe went through what it usually does, which is a bit of a financial crisis, and things went a bit haywire, no fuel available, etc. So I then had a foray out of dietetics for a little bit and worked as a farmer, and I grew flowers on a little plot for a few years. That was interesting, not what I wanted to do, so I was very happy to go back into dietetics again. And at that time my son was about 5, so he had to come into town to preschool. So then I set up a practice here in Harare again. So I used to come to town on a Monday and work for a couple of days and then go back to the farm. So I've moved practices or moved my premises fairly, maybe every 5 years or so, I suppose, due to different circumstances, changes in what's been going on in Zimbabwe and so on. And now I'm working in Borrowdale at a place called Stable Health, where there's lots of other health professionals, so that's quite nice. And that's where I'm at the moment. Actually, I think I was fairly self-motivated. My mum and dad didn't go to university, so they didn't have any experience in helping me to choose where to go or what to do necessarily. But I knew that I wanted to do something to help people, and in those days we didn't have internet, so it wasn't a case of looking up things, what can I do, what are possibilities, which universities do what. You had to apply for a prospectus from the various universities you were interested in and get those in and look through the books to see what courses were available. So my mum actually helped me quite a bit with that, because she had applied and we got the books and we went through, and together we kind of thought that maybe this dietetics was something that I could do if I wasn't really that keen on doing the physiotherapy. So yeah, but I always worked hard. I think I was probably a bit of a nerd at school. Schoolwork was good. I enjoyed it. It was something I didn't find a hardship, and and I've always tried to work hard in whatever I've done. As I said, I had a job as a sales rep working for a pharmaceutical company. I thought that would be an interesting challenge for me, getting out of the public sector and into the private sector. But I really didn't enjoy that job. I found that the ethics of the pharmaceutical company at the time, and possibly even now, were more about pushing sales and not really about the welfare of the patient. And that's something that still I don't feel comfortable with now. I feel that if there's something that's needed, it must be prescribed for sure, but you shouldn't be incentivizing people to sell a product or push a drug just because the sales figures need to be improved. And that's something that a lot of people say to me, well, why don't you sell supplements? Why don't you sell products? And something in me just isn't about that. I feel that if you eat well, if you have a good diet, generally you don't need to supplements, and I'm not really there to push and sell extra things or push my own agenda. My job as a dietitian is to help you improve your health by eating better and changing your lifestyles and your habits, and not about selling you products on the side to make extra money. So dietetics is a very rewarding career. because you get to make a difference in people's lives. So I was pulled back to going back to my work as a dietitian because I really I get satisfaction from helping people and seeing the light go on in their eyes to say, oh, exactly, this is exactly what I need to do now to improve things. Or when they come back for a review, they've achieved what we set out as their goals for in their initial appointment. So it's a very care-based kind of profession, but also goal-driven. So you've got to give the people something to work towards, and of course you're helping to improve their health. So that's always a good thing. So setting up a private practice in Zimbabwe is actually not that difficult. The bones of it anyway. So you need to be registered with the Allied Health Professions Council as a dietitian, and then you need to apply to practice privately. And then what will happen is the people from Allied Health will come and inspect your premises. And obviously there's certain requirements that you have to fulfill in order to open the practice. So it will be the same with practices for physiotherapy or for doctor's rooms or whatever. You need to have the basics there in order to service the client or the patient. So luckily for us as dietitians, we don't need lots of equipment. Really what we need is a scale and a measuring arm or a measuring stick to make sure that we can work out your BMI. We need to have equipment like a computer so that we can look up things or print information. But pretty much we will normally be assessing and talking to patients and giving them information. So you need to have your room set up with place to wash your hands, etc. So Allied comes and does an inspection, and then you also have to register with a health professions authority and have your practice accepted by them. So they will also come in and do an inspection to make sure that everything's up to par. And then you also have to have an inspection by the city of Harare to make sure that you comply with all their regulations. So that would include things like your good old fire extinguishers, etc., and the safety aspects. So once you've done all that and you've paid your fees, then you become registered as a private practice. And in terms of getting it going and getting moving with your practice, exposure is always very important. And this is where marketing yourself is something that you have to do. Not my forte, but what I did do initially is visit doctors, and if I couldn't visit them, I'd write them letters to say, I'm here, this is what I can do for your patients, and this is where I am, so please refer on, and that's how I got started. But I have been in practice for a long time, so I've been around the block quite a lot, and I think a fair number of doctors know who I am, so do refer patients to me. But it's also about feeding back to the doctors, because obviously that's your main source of reference. Your patients come from referrals by doctors, so you need to report back to them and say, right, I've seen your patient, this is what I've found, these are my recommendations, and this is when I'll see them again, etc. So as a dietitian, to remain registered, you have to submit, or you have to complete a certain number of continuing professional development activities every year. So you can't just keep going as a dietitian and not keep up to date. You have to have done certain activities throughout the year, which you submit to your council, and they approve them, and then they'll re-register you. So that would include things like doing webinars, attending events, and it can't just be in your specific area of interest. You have to have a broad range of topics that you've looked at over that year. And one of the things that's important is also doing an ethical element to it. So making sure that you're up to date with all of those kinds of things. So I read a lot in terms of doing those kind of activities, but also there's always something new to learn. So I pretty much look at articles almost every day just to see what's up and what's new. When I see a patient, what happens is it's normally about an hour-long consultation. They'll come in and I start with lots of questions. I need to gather information in order to assess where we are, what's happening with the patient and where do we need to go from there. So I look at basic things like, why have you come to see me? What's the problem? Often there'll be a doctor's note or referral, so that gives me a bit of more background. And then look at things like, what is your lifestyle like? What is your medical history like? So in other words, have you had other problems before? What's your family medical history? Is there anybody in your family that has various conditions, for example, diabetes, high blood pressure, gout, anything like that? I look at your appetite. How is it? Has it changed? Is it better or worse? What about your exercise? Do you exercise regularly? How much? And so on. Look at things like, do you smoke? Do you take alcohol, etc.? And then I'll also look at you physically and say, right, have you got any problems with things like skin rashes? Do you have any problems with your digestion? Have you got heartburn? Do you use things regularly to manage that? Have you got any problems with your hair, your nails, etc.? I will also look at what medication do you take? Do you use any supplements, for example? So there's lots and lots of questions in my route to finding out more information about what's going on. Then I look at your height and weight. We'll do a height and weight measure, look at your BMI. And then I'll also ask you things like, have you had any change in weight? Has it changed in the last 6 months? Have you gained or lost weight? Was that intentional or was it unintentional? What is your usual weight, and do you have a goal weight in mind? If you need to lose weight, is that reasonable, or is that way out of proportion to what can be expected? And then we'll also look at your diet. Basically, what do you normally eat in 24 hours? What are your usual diet habits? What do you usually eat? What things do you eat frequently that may be risk factors? So, for example, do you drink fizzy drinks regularly? How much salt do you use? All of that kind of stuff. And then once I've assessed and gathered all that information, I'll then go into, right, you've come to see me because of this condition. I'll explain what that is, because very often patients go to doctors and they're a little bit scared of doctors. So they don't ask questions. So they come to me and they actually sometimes have no idea what's actually going on or what's wrong with them. So we need to go through that. And then we talk about, right, how does your diet affect this condition and how can it improve things? So we look at that, and then we look at some goals, right? These are the things that I've picked up in your diet, for example, that you can change, and we work on that for a little bit. And then I set them some targets in terms of weight possibly and what changes they can make. And then we look at, when do you need to come back and see me? Maybe you don't, if it's just a simple thing, or maybe it's next week or 2 weeks or a month's time for review, so we can make sure that you actually are making those changes. The types of conditions that I deal with in my practice mostly, the most common is diabetes, most commonly type 2 diabetes, because that's one of the most common conditions affecting Zimbabweans at the moment. I also see what's called pre-diabetes, so it's the condition that occurs before you actually become a fully fledged type 2 diabetic. And then there's various other conditions that I see. The second probably is obesity or overweight. And very often I don't just see one condition in isolation. So if you have type 2 diabetes, you more than likely also have hypertension. You may also be obese or overweight. You may also have high cholesterol. So they often come as a group of conditions together. So it's diabetes, type 2 usually, but also type 1, obesity and overweight, people with hypertension, people with high cholesterol, and then various other conditions. So in Zimbabwe, because there's so few dietitians, we're not able to specialize and only treat one specific area. In the rest of the world, you'll get pediatric dietitians who deal only with kids, or people who only deal with allergies and intolerances, or people who only deal with diabetes. But here we have to treat everybody. So there's people with liver problems, so things like fatty liver, cirrhosis, hepatitis, people with kidney problems like chronic kidney disease or renal failure, going on to hemodialysis or other kinds of dialysis, people with kidney stones, uric acid, polycystic kidney disease, digestive problems like hiatus hernias, ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, inflammatory bowel disease, all those kinds of things, people who are underweight, people with eating disorders, and the list goes on and on. So, any condition that may be improved or be caused by poor diet, the dietitian's for you to come and see. So a dietitian is actually a term protected by law. You can only be a dietitian if you've done a degree in dietetics and done the postgraduate qualification and internship to become a dietitian. Dietitians deal more with medical nutrition therapy as well as general nutrition therapy. So if you're in a hospital and you need to be fed by a tube or fed intravenously, or you are in a surgical ward, or you're in a ward for your diabetes, the dietitian is the person that will come and see you. We are tightly regulated by the Allied Health Professions Council, and so we have to abide by the rules and regulations and by the code of ethics for dietetics. A nutritionist can do some of the work of a dietitian, but not all, but a dietitian can do all the work of a nutritionist, if that makes sense. So nutritionists come in various forms. There's a nutritionist who may have done a three-month course online to become a nutritionist, and she can practice as or work as a nutritionist, or she may have done I'm saying she, it doesn't have to only be a she, it could be a man or a woman. They may have done a 4-year degree in nutrition, but because they haven't done dietetics, they can't become a dietitian unless they do a postgraduate qualification in dietetics. So this is the problem with nutritionists, is that sometimes people work as nutritionists, but they're not as qualified as they possibly should be. And there are nutritionists who are actually registered with Allied Health, and they've done a proper nutrition degree, but they're not allowed to practice privately. They can work in the public sector, but they're not allowed to establish a private practice. And also with dietitians, if you're on medical aid, you can actually claim back the cost of the consultation from your medical aid, whereas if you see a nutritionist, you can't do so. So in Zimbabwe, we have about 15 registered dietitians, which is a huge improvement, because when I first moved here, there were 3. So we've increased 5-fold, but there's still very few. I think the problem is that newly qualified dietitians don't see opportunity in Zimbabwe, and I think that may just be because of how Zimbabwe can be sometimes with the economic challenges, changes in currency and so on, which people can't see, how am I going to make a living from that? But it's also not easy to become a dietitian. It's more onerous. Your requirements to get into a course are much more than if you need to study nutrition. You need more of the sciences, whereas some of the nutrition courses, you don't always need that. And we're losing dietitians. Well, we've lost a few. We haven't lost that many, thank goodness, but we've only got 11 working in Zimbabwe at the moment. I think some have looked for opportunities in other countries because there are more jobs available. So in the private sector, you either become a private dietitian practicing yourself, but there's no real jobs in the private sector. So in the rest of the world, you could work as a dietitian not only in private practice or in hospital, but you can work as in the media, for example, and write articles and be an advisor in that regard. You can work in the food service industry, so you can work for food service companies that provide meals for example, for mines or for schools. And there's opportunities there. You can also work in the pharmaceutical industry, not as a representative selling drugs, but for companies that make tube feeds that are used in hospitals, for example, or for infant nutrition formula producers. There's that aspect. In the food industry, so people produce, or companies producing health products, they will employ dietitians to advise on health claims and nutritional evaluation of the products that they're making. But here, the scope is limited. So there is a shortage of dietitians in Zimbabwe. If we look at per capita, obviously it's pretty dismal. I think the problem is that we don't actually train dietitians locally in Zimbabwe, and that's an area that Allied Health is very aware of. They are trying to get some courses going in Zimbabwe at the University of Zimbabwe and various other universities. The problem is a shortage of lecturing staff who's going to actually lecture the students themselves. And because the requirements to become a lecturer are actually quite onerous, so it's not easy, and not many of us have done sort of doctorates in nutrition or even masters in nutrition. So that's where the problem comes. But there is a Dietetics Association of Zimbabwe, and what we are trying to make sure of is that these courses that are going to be offered in Zimbabwe are going to produce properly qualified registrable dietitians. And that's where we've been having a few issues, in that some of the courses that are being offered and being proposed as dietitians courses are producing students that are not qualified to an international standard. And if you're going to have a dietitian, you need to be qualified to the correct standard so that you provide the correct level of service. Dietetics is a very good profession to go into. There's a huge scope. There's many different areas you can work in. Make sure that your selection of subjects at school is correct so that you can get into a dietetics course. You need to do the sciences because it is a science-based degree. And yes, we need, and then come back to Zimbabwe and use your skills here because, you know, nutrition is so integral to health, and we need people to help the public to implement that advice. So in South Africa, there's a couple of universities that do, or a few more than a couple, quite a few universities that do dietetics. There's University of Pretoria, University of Potchefstroom, University of Stellenbosch, and there used to be a course at UCT or University of Cape Town where you could do a postgraduate master's in dietetics. They've dropped that subsequently, but yeah, so you can do it at those 3 universities. Basically, to get your nutrition right and to get your health improved, there's some simple rules that you can follow. You know, I think a lot of times if you look on the internet, there's a lot of information there which is complicated. You've got to do this, you've got to be counting your macros, you've got to be looking at certain things, eating certain foods and so on. But the reality is that it's pretty simple. You've got to eat real food. Eating lots of processed foods and lots of sugary foods is going to take you down a road of ill health. Whatever goes into your body is what makes it up. So if you're putting junk in there, you're not going to get good performance out of it, and things are going to start to go wrong. So eating natural, healthy foods, real foods is important. Eating little and often is always important. Watching portion sizes. So just because something's healthy doesn't mean you should eat 10 times more of it. That doesn't work like that. You don't need to eat fancy berries from South America and expensive nuts from North Africa or Norwegian salmon or anything like that. We have a lot of healthy foods, natural foods in Zimbabwe. You just got to eat them. And you also need to look at things like drinking enough water, watching your sugar intake, and that's really a very big one. Reducing your salt intake. The latest study has just shown that salt is contributing hugely towards heart disease, which we knew about blood pressure, but we weren't so sure about the heart disease aspect. So that's really important. And then looking at your lifestyle as well. Getting enough sleep. And I think a lot of us just don't get enough sleep, and our children are not getting enough sleep either, and that's really where it starts to go wrong. Exercise, really, really important. Not sitting all day, breaking up your sitting into shorter periods and getting yourself moving. That's really, really important. So there's lots of different aspects to it. It's not just about eating, but it's also about your lifestyle as well. Sleep is really, really important. And what I've realized seeing my patients over the years is that for some people it's quite a difficult thing, and for others it's just something that's in short supply. It's really important to try and get at least 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night, because that's the time where your body restores and regenerates and repairs whatever's gone wrong or whatever's worn out. So it's a time for your brain to rest, but it's also time for your body and for your gut to rest. If you don't sleep, if you're staying awake late at night, very often you'll get hungry and you start eating at midnight. Your body is not meant to be eating in the middle of the night. It's meant to be resting and restoring. And what happens also over that time is that your hormones reset. And if you don't give your body that chance to do so, it remains in a state of stress. And we know that stress is related to the buzzword which is called inflammation, which is the basis of many of our degenerative and lifestyle kind of diseases. There's a huge focus these days on traditional foods and the health benefits thereof. And of course, we're very lucky in Zimbabwe, as I said before, about the fact that we have such a wide variety of naturally occurring foods here that have many health benefits. So a study that was released just recently showed that people who eat millet have better control of their blood sugar levels, specifically if they have diabetes or they have a lower risk of developing diabetes. So millet is obviously a small grain, it's high in fiber, it's a very slow release type of starch or carbohydrate. So it's a really great source of food for us to eat. However, I must always emphasize that just because something is healthy, it doesn't mean we need to eat large quantities of it. So portion control is always really important in this aspect. But there's, the millet porridge that you can use to either make a porridge for breakfast or use it to make a sadza for one of your meals. So millet is good, and of course all the other small grains, things like sorghum and so on, are also excellent. Green veggies are actually a really good source of vitamin K, and speaking to an optician just recently, she said that in the Zimbabwean population, generally speaking, because we eat so many green veg, the incidence of macular degeneration, which is a condition that affects your eyes, is actually fairly low. So green veg are really great. They're a good source of vitamin C. And of course, you can grow them in your garden very easily. So those are great. Things like majanje are great, also a good source of vitamin C, high source of fiber. Again, portion control is important because obviously they've got sugar in them, natural sugar, but if you eat too many of them, they can affect your blood sugar levels. Things like your roots, so madumbe, for example, very high in fiber, and a good source of vitamin C and manganese, also really good, but again, small quantities. My poor husband has a tough life being married to a dietitian. He doesn't really have much choice in what he eats. No, I'm only joking. We actually eat, I would say, fairly normally and just sensibly. Our main focus is on eating real food, so takeaways and eating out we don't do very often. I like to cook food at home. Focus on including lots of vegetables in our diet. So I always tell the story, and my son's going to kill me if he watches this, but I used to send him to school with a little lunchbox with cut up veggies, so things like carrot sticks, cucumbers, baby tomatoes and so on. And he did that all the way through until he left school, and even now at university he still makes sure that he has his veggies every day at lunch and supper. So obviously I've ingrained those habits in him, and my daughter does the same. But our eating habits are really about mostly eating well, eating good food, not eating lots of deep fried stuff, really monitoring our sugar intake or moderating it. But of course we do have treats. I mean, everyone in our house loves chocolates, and what's life without a little bit of chocolate every now and then? But we don't do it all the time. So the other thing that I don't really allow at home, or we don't have at home, are sweet drinks. So nobody uses sugar in tea or coffee. We don't drink things like cordials, and fizzy drinks we just don't have at home either. So exercise is something that's really important, and I think our whole family tries to do that. I'm not a great believer in extreme exercise, actually. I think that moderate exercise is the way forward. It's less stressful on the joints and so on. So for me, I love walking, and I'm lucky enough to live in Harare and in Nyanga, so I can go for lovely long walks in Nyanga too. And then a bit of resistance training is always important, especially as you get older, because you start to lose muscle mass. And we know that maintaining your muscle mass as you get older is very important for your metabolic health, as well as for making sure that you stay strong as you get older. So the 80-20 rule is something that's really helpful, because I think these days when you look at the internet, and I always go back to that because it's such a prevalent thing in our lives, and we fed such a lot of information from the internet. There's a lot of strict rules that are proposed by various nutrition advisors and health influencers. You have to follow these rules, and if you don't follow them, you failed and you're not doing well. But we must realize, I think, that as human beings, we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And sometimes we enjoy something that's maybe not quite on the list of all the healthy foods that we should eat. So my philosophy is that if you eat well 80% of the time, there's 20% leeway in terms of having something that you like that's maybe not on the most healthy list, and that way it gives you a little bit more breadth to just enjoy your food, because at the end of the day we are human beings. We do enjoy food. We don't just eat for health, because if you feed a dog, you feed him the same food every day, it tastes the same, he never looks up at you and says, excuse me, can I have something different? I'm bored of this. As human beings, we like flavor, we like variety, we eat because we're with family, we eat at celebrations, we eat when we're on holiday, and we enjoy it. So we've got to make sure that we are able to enjoy but maintain a healthy lifestyle. If I was not a dietitian and I had a stronger stomach, I probably would have been a doctor. Books that I've read, I do read a fair amount. I normally actually read articles, scientific articles about things to do with nutrition and dietetics. But I did read a book a little while ago about how to live well, 6 keys to a happy and healthy life, and that's by Dr. Frank Lipman. I tend to be more looking for books that have a moderate approach to nutrition, because I don't believe in fanatical approaches. I think it's detrimental, and it creates this whole diet mentality, which then leads us down the rabbit hole of eating disorders. So this is a very well-rounded book, and it basically talks about healthy nutrition, but how to make small changes to your eating in order to achieve the goals that you're looking for. So instead of overhauling your whole diet and lifestyle in 2 minutes, and which becomes an impossible task, you start working on small changes in what you're eating and how you're eating in order to move towards a healthier lifestyle and a better way of eating. So he also focuses on things like your sleep quality and amount, things like exercise, avoiding processed and toxic kind of things, so foods that contain lots of chemicals and stuff like that, how to manage your stress. And one of the things that I really find important is finding something to do that gives you pleasure and makes your life have some meaning. Because I think a lot of us work. Maybe that's not always what we want to do or what gives us the most pleasure, and we forget about connecting with our family, with our friends, making sure that we have a happiness factor in our lives as well. Another book that I've read, which I find really useful, is The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. She's a motivational speaker and really helps people to focus on achieving their goals and moving forward towards success. So in my work, obviously, I'm trying to get people to change what they do, to improve their lifestyle, improve their habits. And very often people find that very difficult. It's not easy. You know what you need to do, but you just sometimes can't do it. So this 5-Second Rule book really helps you to stop procrastinating, stop overanalyzing what you have to do, stop being afraid of making changes, and just get on and do it. And I think that's really important for long-term change, because if you only do it for a short period of time, it's not going to work. And very often the changes you make may not be as comfortable as you would like them to be. So it helps you to just do the things that are difficult and uncomfortable, but make a decision and move forward. So that's really a helpful book, I think. And then the last, it's not actually a book, but it's a site that I really find very useful for people who have type 2 diabetes, and actually even type 1. It's called diabetes.co.uk. It's got such a lot of information about diabetes, about its treatment, about diet, and various other things. And you know, as diabetes is so common, and it's something that never goes away, it's something that's really helpful as a way of supporting and improving your knowledge about the condition. So to change your eating habits and to achieve long-term results, you need to make sure that you're doing things consistently over time. There's no point in just doing a diet for 2 weeks or for 2 months or for 6 months and then reverting back to what you were doing before, because whatever was hassling you before, whether it be weight or any other conditions, is just going to come back. Eating healthily is a long-term investment. It's a lifetime investment. So you've got to make those changes for the long term. You can't be a weekend warrior where you eat well in the week and then the weekend comes and you drink and eat and whatever you want, because whatever you did in the week is going to be undone by Monday morning anyway. So it's a long-term investment, and it's also an individual thing. So, you know, there's a lot of information out there about different diets that work. You need to find something that works for you, because you're an individual, you have an individual set of circumstances, you have an individual set of likes and dislikes and abilities too. So find something that works for you and stick with it, and you'll achieve success. So banting or the low-carb or very low-carb diet is something that's quite topical at the moment. The low-carb diet can be classified as various different forms of low-carb, because there's very low-carb, which is also called ketogenic, sometimes called banting diet, where you have to regulate strictly how much carbohydrate you eat. That can be very difficult and very onerous at times, because you're always having to calculate what your carb content is and checking whether you're in ketosis or not. It is indicated in certain instances. It can be helpful in people with type 2 diabetes who are very obese and really need to lose weight quickly. But it hasn't been studied in the long term, and information's coming out now that maybe it has more serious side effects than we realize. So it can be a tricky thing. It also doesn't work for everybody. So it's something that you maybe need to discuss with your doctor and then with a dietitian to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Then there's a low carb, which is pretty much between about 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrate a day. That tends to be less onerous and a little bit more easy to apply, and generally also gets fairly good results. The NHS has actually implemented now a low-carb program, which they put people on who have diabetes or type 2 diabetes, and they're achieving huge success with that. So it is something that does work, and I think the focus on reducing carbohydrates, our carbohydrate intake, has increased a lot, and I certainly use that quite a bit in my practice. Intermittent fasting is also something that's fairly topical at the moment and has been shown to have benefits. So, for example, it's helped to reduce levels of inflammation in the body. It helps to promote weight loss. It can help to regulate blood sugar levels, and if done properly, can really work very well. There's various aspects of, or different types of intermittent fasting. So you can do intermittent fasting every day in a timed eating and timed fasting approach. You maybe have a window of 8 hours where you can eat, and then 16 hours where you don't eat. Or you may do intermittent fasting where you fast for 2 days and then eat normally for 5 days. So there's that kind of fasting as well. I think the secret to intermittent fasting is really about the fasting aspect. You are fasting during that time, but it doesn't mean that you catch up the meal you missed when you start eating again. Basically, you're giving up one meal a day. And it can work for some people. Some people find that it doesn't work. So you just got to see whether it suits you or not.
That was a powerful and enlightening masterclass. These are the key takeaways for me for a healthy lifestyle. That good sleep, rest, and exercise are important. That just because food is healthy doesn't mean you have to binge on the food. Portion control is still very important. That caring for people is actually good for your business. I hope you enjoyed that masterclass. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to share, and to visit our website. Until next time, cheers to you all.